we looked at the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that's what we're doing here today.
Indeed.
Are we ready to begin?
We are. Has Greg joined us?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Next slide, Monica.
There we go.
Thank you. So, of course, we know that we're here to learn about front yard design do's and don'ts. So, as Marcia and Sule said, I am Cheryl Buckwalter, and I'm not the star today. I'm simply facilitating and helping to guide us through the chat and questions and answers and so forth. So I would like to welcome, though, Greg Bundison with the Sacramento Suburban Water District. Sacramento Suburban Water District and the Regional Water Authority, bewatersmart.info, you'll hear us say that website quite a few times, are the kind hosts and sponsors of this webinar today. So Greg, please tell us some about the Sacramento Suburban Water District.
Thank you, Cheryl. And I want to start off by saying thank you to Marcia and Sule and Cheryl for being here with us today. And thank you to Monica Garcia for facilitating and the Regional Water Authority for putting this event on. It's our pleasure at Sac Suburban to host today. Just to give everybody an idea of who we are, in case you're not a Sac Suburban Water District customer. The map that you're seeing on your screen right now, the little star is downtown Sacramento. So you can see we kind of serve the eastern suburbs of Sacramento County and the unincorporated areas from North Highlands down through Arden Arcade, pieces of Fair Oaks and Citrus Heights and Carmichael, all the way down to the river. We've got about 46,000 service connections and service a population of about 180,000 people. Our primary water sources are groundwater, and we also bring in surface water from the American River and Folsom Reservoir. And for those of you who are, go ahead and go to the next slide, Monica. And for those of you who are customers of Sacramento Suburban Water District, just wanted to kind of highlight some of the offerings that we provide. We do offer WaterWise house calls where we'll actually come in and evaluate the water use at your home and give you some tips and tricks about how to become more efficient. We do offer leak investigations in case you think you have a leak. We'll come out and do specific tests to see if we could figure out what's leaking and give you an idea of what needs to be repaired. We won't do repairs for you, but we can at least help you identify what it is. And we also go out and we investigate water use concerns. So if you see something in your neighborhood or out in the community and there's water running all over the place and you just don't think it looks right, give us a call. We'll go out and have a look. We do also offer rebates for irrigation efficiency upgrades where you replace some of your higher non-efficient sprinkler nozzles with more efficient ones. We do high efficiency toilets for any toilets that are older than 1992. Clothes washers, that one's a rebate for the EPA Water Sense's most efficient list. Well, actually it's the Energy Star most efficient list. So have a look at that list. It's only a select few, but there are some primo clothes washers and dryers. I own them myself, and I would the energy savings and water savings are premium. Weather-based sprinkler timers, pool covers, and rain sensors. So if you are interested in any of those, please visit our website, sswd.org, and I'll turn it back over to everybody. And thank you again for everybody for coming out and joining us today. Take care.
Hey, thank you, Greg. So just a little bit of information here before we get started. This webinar, as I mentioned, is recording. And so it will be available on the bewatersmart.info/webinars website, just where you went to learn about this webinar today. And there are others as well coming up. So I encourage you to register for them. Next slide. So please enter your questions into the chat. Even if you have some technical issues, enter that into the chat as well. We all are living in different times. While we think that we're getting a little more accustomed to technology, it always sends us a little whammy. So please bear with us if anything should happen. After the webinar, you'll receive a short survey. I encourage you to please take that survey, give us your input. We're always looking forward to improving and providing educational programs that you want. And so as it says here at the bottom, sign up for more webinars at that link. Okay, next. So it's my pleasure now to turn this over to Souley and Marcia Scott. Take it away.
All right. Thanks, and everybody. Welcome to Front Yard Design Do's and Don'ts. I want to reiterate our presenters are Marcia Scott, Souley Tranquilli, and Cheryl Buckwalter. We are 3 educators and landscape designers in the Sacramento area. So why are you renovating? Why are you here today? You must be thinking about it. You must be gathering your thoughts. Are you doing it for curb appeal? Are you wanting to make your jealous neighbors stand up and take a look at you? Do you want to create beauty? Hopefully you will be able to count on low maintenance and water efficiency as your renovation is completed. But we also think that you could make your front yard a wildlife magnet, and all these things can be yours with a thoughtful renovation. So today we're going to cover some thoughts to gather. We're not going to get into site-specific advice and questions. Those are things for a landscape professional, generally a landscape designer. But we want to tell you that there's also books on design that are very excellent. A lot of them are written by the British garden designers. So that'll be really sound design advice, and the process is actually sound. But we want to remind you that in some design books, the plant palette is not appropriate for the Northern California and the Sacramento Valley. So try and use plant palettes that are appropriate for us. And we're going to give you lots of great resources here about what you can do and where you can find that information. Next. So front yards being renovated create a lot of opportunities, and it's actually a very unique space on a property in suburbia. And generally we see people want to modernize their property, make it attractive. Of course, you're going to upgrade it to look more in sync with the times. You probably need to take a little minute to evaluate and think about your on-site resources. See what you already have that you can use. Obviously, you're going to think about aesthetics, but making the space more functional should be at the top of your list, I would imagine. And one of those aspects is creating habitat for both humans and wildlife. Next. So first things first, what is a front yard? Front yards are generally transitional spaces. They're places that we pass through to get from the public spaces of the street and sidewalk into the private spaces of our home, our backyard, things like that. So we will talk about that a little bit later, but front yards are generally the first impression of any home, and they do require some specific design features. So we're gonna talk a little bit about some things you can think about. Next. As we all know, a lot of different things happen in the front yard. This slide here is to insert a little humor into your day, but also to remind you that front yards are multi-purpose. A lot of different creatures use the front yard. And it is time to turn it over to Marcia. Next.
Hi, everybody. So in your front yard, you can also think about bringing life to it, like habitat. We're all about habitat. You can really own your landscape, make it uniquely yours. You can create a yard where you want to linger or hang out with those critters. And at the same time, make your landscape a part of the fabric of life for your wildlife and your human community. Next slide, please. So here's an overview of a Sacramento neighborhood. Imagine being a bird and traveling from yard to yard. You need a trail, a little road for them, or something, some cozy, safe spaces. Well, the tree canopies combine to make those trails. We refer to them as habitat corridors. You can see a few habitat corridors inside the light green oval, clusters of trees. Now look inside the red oval to the right. Those front yards consist of lots of lawn, Lawns provide almost no wildlife value and very few trees or shrubs for wildlife. No corridors. So sadly, that means those yards support very little wildlife. No hangouts. Our wildlife needs support from all of your landscapes. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, back slide, please.
Marcia, which slide do you want on?
I want slide number 15.
What is the heading on it, the title?
The title is Habitat Potential. So
Okay.
I'll just start talking about the habitat potential. Do reclaim your front yard. To add human habitat to your front is easy. Add a bench or even a small patio. Visit with your neighbors. Become a part of your local community. Grab a quick sit on your bench when you come home. You can observe your local community, local wildlife, and absorb some good outdoor energy. And by the way, front yards, patios are great crime deterrents as well. Think of them as eyes on the street. Next slide, please. And also, when we're approaching the front yard, don't forget about the beauty. Help your house make a great first impression. Create a really nice, friendly path and add color. Next slide, please. Oh, this is just nasty. Don't do this. Why? Not very inviting, not very habitable. This southwest exposure will be excruciatingly hot and glary bright in summer. No one wants to hang out here. Wouldn't even want to open curtains. So sad. Next slide, please. Oh, much better. This front yard covers all the bases we'll talk about today. This used to be a big lawn, and now lawn be gone, replaced by trees, shrubs, and ornamental grasses, a seating area underneath the umbrella in a semi-private space, and a new walkway to the front door. This is attractive and beckoning. Next slide, please. What should I keep? Well, you might want to hold on to some of those big old trees that you have because they're great for habitat, great for shade. We hope there are things you can keep. It's important to reuse what you can and see the old things shine with a new light. Some of those old plants are going to need a different watering regimen though than your new front yard. So you're going to have to pay attention to that. Next slide, please. Note the new trees and the existing crabapple tree in this front yard renovation. The crabapple's on the right. Beautiful tree. Notice the use of mulch that covers the soil and protects tree roots. Next slide, please. So you want to evaluate your front yard resources before you get started. We all know that you have water, soil, wildlife, and space. You already have those things. You want to hang on to as much of that as you can. So every landscape already has resources that you should work hard to retain. With water, hang on to every raindrop that falls from the sky. Use your soil to store it with rain gardens, meandering swales, rain barrels, berms. Slow spread and sink that water. With soil, you already have soil. I know everybody's going, I have terrible soil, but there are lots of wonderful things about the soil that you have. You want to keep what you have from washing away. So you're going to direct the water flow away from the buildings and prevent water from washing your soil away. Remember, healthy soil can store water through the dry seasons. You have lots of wildlife there, and hopefully you'll encourage those guys to stay and attract more wildlife through thoughtful plant choices and maybe a fountain or a bird bath, something like that. And you have lots of space, plus some underutilized spaces like hell strips or side yards that you might not even think of as part of your front yard. Next slide, please. So here's an example of a rain barrel, keeping a little bit of water for you. There are lots of other ways to store it, but did you know your best water storage strategy is your soil? The soil is like one ginormous tank, the soil down below, without even putting a tank down there. So two resources in one, soil plus water. Next slide, please. So we want to make sure that your front yard is going to be useful. Ensure that it functions well. Think about how you could use better the space that you have. Like, what doesn't work right now? What could work better? Do you have enough room to get out of your car? Can you roll that stroller up the front path? So you're going to think about all these things. Next slide, please. So this photo is an example of a hell strip, sometimes known as a parking strip. This one is even in its debris-laden state from a recent storm, like the one we just had, it still adds interest and habitat to the streetscape. We're just going to call these guys help strips. Help strips are an underused opportunity. Another underused opportunity are side yards. On the side of a house, you can easily achieve vertical beauty, microstorage, and wildlife habitat with flowering vines. You might even have enough room for a tiny pocket patio and turn that side yard into a nice other yard for your hangout. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. There you go. So this is an example of a tiny slide number with the blue chairs in the patio. Go back. There you go. This is an example of a tiny patio and a flow-through space that goes from the driveway to the front walk. And this person decided to put a little tiny patio, and it is so charming. Got two little blue chairs, and then there's a nice privacy wall there, so that when they look out their front windows, they don't immediately see the sidewalk and the street, and the sidewalk and the street don't immediately see them. And I want you to notice that patio is made of broken concrete. When they remove their driveway, they use that stuff to make a patio. That broken concrete, sometimes called urbanite. So if you want to be fancy, you could say, I'm using urbanite. And they saved all that concrete from the landfill. Then they put a little permeable stuff right between the cracks of that concrete, so the whole patio is permeable, and that soil underneath is storing water for them. And then these guys get bonus points for adding pollinators and perches for birds, as well as they get excellent views from their windows watching all that wildlife. This family, which happens to be Sulei's house, is not staring out at cars and streets anymore. Thanks. Next slide, please.
Thank you.
Souley?
Yeah, very nice. So you've thought about your resources and you're analyzing what you have and what you need to get rid of. And you're thinking about functionality. Now it's time to make a plan, because you can't assume that you're going to remember all of those little thoughts. To be really thoughtful about a multifunctional plan and a very smart renovation, you need to put it down on paper, all right? There's a lot of things involved if you want to have a water-saving, habitat-enriched, environmentally sound, and functional landscape. So just do a really simple little sketch that you can refer back to and make changes. It'll be a fun little document for when you're all done, and you can see where you've been and where you went to. All right, next. So let's go back to the idea of front yards and what they are. Think a minute about a front yard. What is a front yard? It's a public space, all right? We're showing in this slide the public space of the sidewalk and the street, and how if you add another walkway to the front door, that front door is entry into the private space of the house in the backyard. Front yards are transitional. We're passing through. A lot of front yards don't have a place to really linger or hang out for either wildlife or humans. And this is a great opportunity to rethink that. Okay, front yards, remembering that front yards are the first impression of any home. So we're just illustrating here how we've got that pathway that leads up through the old front yard, the old lawn, and then we've created a pocket patio where you can even see something different behind the wall, and you're looking out of the window from the private space into the public space. All right, next. Here's some details to think about as you gather your thoughts about a front yard. We have to kind of back things up. We have to check out what's happening with our neighbors on our property lines. It's a good idea to research, if you have an HOA, what are the requirements for that? They will vary across the board. Are there CC&Rs? Check out your setback requirements. How high can front fences and walls go? In particular, those property lines can either make or break a relationship. So don't assume agreement on the property line. This is me standing on my property line and my neighbor wants to keep his lawn and he needs something to mow against. He wants to run his trimmer. He likes it clean and neat. That's what he wanted. So we did that. All right, next. And we would be remiss if we didn't address the utilities. And this is an interesting talk about public and private space. Your utilities will enter from the public space into your private space. They'll travel across your front yard. So you do need to call and find all of these utilities: electrical, gas, sewer, cable, telephone, we forgot to put up there, and water. In particular, it's a really good idea to find your water meter and to locate your hose bibs, and think about new hose bibs if you need those. Find your irrigation valves. Oftentimes they're all banked together, but they don't necessarily have to be. Maybe you want to relocate those. Find your shutoff valve for your water and find if there's a separate irrigation shutoff valve, and if not, add one of those. It's a great way to be able to check your irrigation system if you don't have to shut off the water to the house. You can only shut off your irrigation in the front yard. All right, next. And here's another unsexy part of designing a front yard landscape. You really have to think about grading and drainage and flow. This is really where money goes underground and disappears. If it's done right, you'll never hear about it, but it is money well spent the very first time. So if you're not sure, go ahead and get an opinion or some help from a qualified professional. It's their job to help you make that happen. But we definitely want to correct any old issues with standing water to move that water away from the building. And your new plan, you want to make sure you avoid new problems. So grab that water, but be smart about it. And only problems will surface later on. If you did it right, that money will be well spent and you won't even think about it later. Okay, proper grading and drainage is a big deal. Next. All right, here's your slide of humor. To be fair, this home is an older home in very much an older Sacramento neighborhood, and it could really use some modern problem solving, right? They have gotten kind of clever and creative. However, it made me giggle the whole rest of the day. I got a real kick out of this. There are some very clever ways that we can grab that water and move it away from the house, change the grade in the yard, create a dry well or a dry stream bed, or perhaps add rain barrels and drain them away. Lots of different ways to do that: a rain garden, a berm, all of that, bioswale. But hang on to that water before it enters the storm drain. Rainwater is your resource here, and we want to grab that rain and sequester it into the soil. Next. Here's a fun picture of what it looks like when you drain your downspout into a dry stream bed. Lots of nice plant material around that to kind of soften. This is really the only time that we use cobble and gravel in the landscape. It is a way to drain water, all right, and create a nice landscape design feature. It's going to help slow the water. It's going to help spread that water flow out. And then by doing that, the water will sink into the soil and hang out there until it goes deeper, and it won't hit your sidewalk, and it won't hit the storm drains. You actually are part of avoiding storm water pollution and quickly rising waters during the rains. Right? Next. So we've talked about the unsexy things. Now it's time to make a plan for your hardscape. Now you might be asking, well, what is hardscape? That's a very, landscapey term. Hardscape is really just all the durable or hard features that go into your landscape. These are things that are not alive. Hardscape is not living. And often hardscape is how we walk about, or all the structures and features that support our pedestrian and auto access. So it's your driveways, your ramps, your pathways, decks, walls, railings, arbors, all of that business. So think about your hardscape and what you will make your hardscape out of. And can you make that permeable? Next. As you're considering your hardscape, we know that that's often the most expensive part of a plan, of a landscape. Think about who's using that space and how you could use that space better. Who needs to move through? What kind of wheels? Do you have walkers and wheelchairs? Do you have a bunch of kids with bicycles? You have a little bike gang. Do you have scooters? Do you need a little extra space to dismount from your driveway? Do you need an extra pathway to get to a new gate? Just think about who's using that and devise the appropriate surfaces and make them wide enough. There's bonus points for you if your new hardscape can be permeable. By that, we mean flow through, the water can trickle down through the hardscape, okay? Make those spaces 2 inches wide. Or double bonus points if you can modify your existing hardscape to allow for the enhanced flow of the water. Keep it, but maybe make some breaks in there and do it in a way that is high design. That could be a lot of fun. Next. So the other thing about a hardscape plan is creating those little lingering spots, creating a landing for humans to stop on a pathway or a small patio, or just even a bench, a place to sit there, or a platform to visit with neighbors, and also a spot for wildlife to hang out. This is a front yard is a multifunctional space. So create a community vibe so you can sit out and have a glass of wine, or drink your tea in the morning. Carve out a resting spot, make it multifunctional. All right, add hidden storage, grow some vegetables, add some private or semi-private areas. Next. So we are going to get to your questions and answers. I see them flashing up here and I'm moving through, so I don't have time to stop and read them. We will get to them at the end of the presentation, and we definitely want to answer everybody's questions. So keep bringing them on. Next. So after your hardscape plan, we go to softscape. Softscape is another word for plants, or your planting plan. Softscape is all the living things in the landscape, plants and soil, right? Plants are not just pretty faces, they are hard workers in your landscape, and they add a design aesthetic and a living aspect to any space. So you want to start with trees and then process down through hedges and large shrubs, and then work down to ground covers. We suggest ornamental grasses, things like that. But we do encourage you to replace high water use lawn with low water use plants. And we've given you resources in some handouts for some plant lists that are appropriate to us, or how to look up plants that you might want to put in your landscape to see what their water use is in our region, because the water use for plants is different in every region of California. Next. All right. As we're thinking about plants in our softscape, you want to think about who all is going to use the landscape. It's not just the wildlife and the humans, it's also our pets and our children. Pets are clients too. They're users, and you want to make it so they can enjoy a landscape. And in this yard, this is my dog, and she's enjoying a California native blue fescue, which was planted before we even knew she was a thing. And she's taken over this little spot, and it's kind of charming the way she owns it. And it's her little grass bed. So I have noticed that dogs love ornamental grasses, and she doesn't hurt them at all. It's actually quite sweet. Next. So you're thinking about your softscape, and you're thinking about that living element of your landscape. The soil is alive, the trees, all right, the grass, the shrubs. All of these things are the living elements of your garden. Next. So how are you going to collect up the things that you're keeping and then renovate with new softscape? As you remove that lawn, you're going to layer in low water plants and native plants that have more habitat value. We definitely, if you didn't hear anything that we said today, this one thing we hope you heard, please do layer in trees, even small trees. We have some lovely trees on our list for shading hot reflective surfaces of Sacramento streets and buildings and driveways. Even if you're a north-facing landscape, you can do your neighborhood a service by adding in a tree that will shade the landscape when it's the hot, or shade the street when it's the hottest of the hot months. Trees are vertical wildlife habitat. Trees are a big fat deal. California native plants are habitat rich and low maintenance as well. So we're giving you resources, check those out. Next. And I'm turning it over to Marcia.
Thanks, Sule. I just want to make a little plug for the planting plan and the hardscape plan. You guys, these can be simple little sketches. They don't have to be anything fancy, but they're things that you could refer back to when times get confusing. So we're back to California natives as great plants. Here are a couple of resources. California Native Plant Society, that's the cnps.org, and calscape.org is their plant website. You can go on there to see what does well in your area and what supports the particular kind of habitat that you might want. So check out these resources. And of course, the number one way to improve habitat is to remove your lawn and replace it with more habitat-friendly landscaping. Next, please. And the best plant for habitat are trees. Trees, trees, and more trees. And a great local resource is the Sacramento Tree Foundation. You can find it online at sactree.org. They have great lists, and we also include them in our resources of handouts at the end. So trees add nice safe spaces. They can add food, little perching places. Put a bird bath near a tree, and you'll watch the birds go from the tree to the bird bath. They need safety, these guys. Next, please. And along with, all the plants you're thinking about, like perhaps what you have in your yard right now is an invasive plant and you don't even know it. Maybe you have a lot of Vinca major or something. So the way to check out some of the plants that you do have is at a site called plantright.org, and these people make sure that they're trying to go on the hunt for invasive plants in California. And if you have an invasive plant, when you add a new yard, it's going to get worse. You're going to add soil, nice water, and compost. Your invasive plants will just move right in. If you guys want to find anything else out about habitat, go to the National Wildlife Foundation for more information. There's some really cool videos on there. You will love them. They're great. Next, please. So we made our planting plan, so we know how far apart to put these plants because we made a planting plan. And then after that, we can figure out how we're going to irrigate everything. This slide showing you the plants at the right placing, and then what's installed here is an inline drip irrigation system, which is a very efficient way to water at a nice spacing. And this guy's on a slope, and you can see the wetting pattern running down the way water does on a slope. After this whole thing is planted, then mulch will cover all of those drip lines. And they'll be easy to find, no problem, because they're just under mulch afterwards. Next, please. Next, here's another view of that same inline drip grid. Regardless, whatever you use, maybe you're going to use spray irrigation or something, you want to choose a really efficient watering method. And it sounds like Sac Suburban can help you with that too. Next, please. So after you have your irrigation system, you're going to really want to have a controller for it. Do yourself a favor and get one with Wi-Fi capability so you can program from your phone or other wireless device. I believe there's a rebate for you through your water company for a smart controller. You can save up to 10,000 gallons of water per year by using a smart controller. Next, please. Do try out this smart irrigation scheduler, because let's admit, programming a timer can be a daunting task. For those of you who have to figure out your own irrigation controller schedules because your own timer isn't very smart, try out this scheduler. You'll be surprised how simple it is. It really makes a very confusing task quite easy. Next. And now a word about soil. So this is a little secret. Soils are your greatest landscape treasure. Next, please. You're going to want to protect them as a prized possession. When you add nutritious, so think about what you're going to do with your soil. Soil stores a lot of things. It stores water, right? Well, it also stores weed seeds. So weed seed bank can be down to about a foot or even more. And when you bring that soil up, you're releasing a lot of seeds to water and light and ability to grow. So you're going to want to think about what you do with your soil. You better have a really good reason to be tilling up that soil. Because when you add nutritious compost and extra water, weeds will make their appearance. Be aware that tilling can really make your weed problem worse. Next, please. And as far as weeds, do identify your existing weeds. The type of weeds and their life cycle will dictate what process and timing you need to remove them. And relying on chemicals and herbicides and pre-emergence is really bad because they're damaging to your precious soil. Don't ignore persistent weeds. These pests will come roaring back when provided with the nutrients. And so if you ID them to help you decide what to do with them, you can go to that site, ipm.usanr.edu. It's in our resources for you. And they'll help you decide how to get rid of these things without the use of soil damaging chemicals. Control weeds in your new garden for the future with a nice 4-inch layer of mulch, 4 inches thick. Next, please. I seem to be talking a lot about soil, but soil is really, really important to your successful landscape. So during your build, during the rainy season, don't walk on or work soils when wet. It's really important. It might be tempting to do, but don't do it. Bad news. Protect your soils by making walkways out of wide wooden boards for foot traffic, because the boards will disperse the weight of human feet. Also, it's especially important to mark out tree root zones before you begin your project and protect them. Trees can really get a lot of damage from having vehicles and people walking all over them. So sometimes you'll see those orange fences around trees. That's the reason why they're required to do that. It is far easier to protect soil than it is to rehabilitate it afterwards. It takes years to rehabilitate it. Years, not weeks, not months, years, like 10, 20, 30. Plant roots can't access water and nutrients in compacted soils, and water can't penetrate compacted soils. So you can see how that's really going to affect your plants. Next. Souley.
Thank you, Marcia. That was excellent information about irrigation, timers, and scheduling, and soil. Very, very important. So our roundup today, we covered quite a bit, and these are some general things, but we've definitely rounded them up on some handouts for you, some good resources. But think about your front yard as a way to add habitat for humans and wildlife and pollinators. As you beautify, you want to revisit your resources and reevaluate how you need to use your space. And then we're going to urge you to make a plan, get those thoughts around grading and drainage, and move into hardscape and plants. Jot it down on a piece of paper. Okay, it doesn't have to be fancy. And again, we keep talking about habitat and native plants, but native plants are a big fat deal and they can add a lot of value to your landscape. Irrigation, how to irrigate, smart controllers and scheduling. Oh my, soil and weeds. We hope that you enjoy this process and that you go deeper into your thoughts about landscape design. We hope we've given you a few things to think about and that you do it in a sustainable way. Next. And finally, you should have fun as you do this. This is a photograph from somewhere in Sun City, Lincoln Hills. I have no idea who was doing what there, but it was very amusing and it made my day to see what somebody was up to with the rocks. So next. Do appreciate all the gifts that your front yard will be offering you. Enjoy. Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for
And
joining us.
the questions and answers.
Great, thank you. I know that Monica has a poll question for us, and I do have a list of some questions that were asked and some answers even that were offered during the presentation today. Monica, would you like to ask that poll question now?
Yes, so let me launch the poll.
Okay.
Two
And while you do that,
questions.
here we go. So how did you hear about this webinar? That will be bewatersmart.info. Did you learn about it through Facebook, a friend, family member, Sacramento Suburban Water District, or some other way? And would you be interested in a longer, more in-depth class on front yard design? And look at these numbers coming in. So everybody can see, have you had a chance to enter your poll? Other, I'd be interested to hear how the other was. Who heard about it through other? Maybe you can enter that into the chat for us so we can learn other ways to reach out to people. Okay, why don't we end our poll? That's great information. Thank you.
Here are the results.
Oh, cool.
Very good. So one of our questions, unless there's anything else you wanted to add about that, Monica.
No, I'm good. We should answer the questions.
Okay, great. Thank you. So one of the questions was, are the presentation slides available online? And yes, they will be available. This recorded session will be available. Excuse me, Monica, can you close the poll? I'm still seeing it. I'll keep talking though. And so, but yes, the recorded presentation will be online where you registered for this at bewatersmart.info/webinars. So I have some questions. One was, okay, we have 2 large maple trees in our front yard. We killed the lawn years ago, but with the shallow roots of the maple trees, we seem to be limited to seasonal bulbs in our front yard forest. And then the second part to this, are there any other plants that you can recommend for planting under maples? We enjoy the bulbs, but would love something larger and more permanent. Thank you for the suggestions. Who wants to go for that first?
I think the arborist should start on
I
that.
I would like to take the first part of that question, and hopefully, Sule, you can answer the plant part.
Okay.
It's basically a really typical example of tree root competition, and maples are particularly, have particularly greedy roots. So there's a couple planting protocols for you when you find that situation. When you go to plant, you're going to want to dig your holes nice and wide, 3 to 4 times as wide as is needed. Usually you don't dig them quite that wide. You don't have to dig them any deeper, but definitely wider. If you run into roots, you can cut them, surprisingly. You can probably cut up to about 1/3 of your tree's roots, but you know what? If you're really doing some serious cutting, you want to bring in an arborist to help you decide that. But anyway, if you cut some roots, anything larger than about 1 inch, you want to make a clean cut when you finally finish with a saw or a lopper. Then you want to take that hole and you want to line it with newspaper, not landscape fabric. You want to line it with something that's going to decompose. So line it with newspaper. It'll keep the roots from immediately going in there. You want to use compost in your mix when you plant the plant. And then when that plant's in, you want to water frequently. Now, you want to be a little choosy about your plants. Sometimes if you're just picking any old thing, you want to make sure it tolerates shade. And a wide spreading plant is going to be a nicer fit, but then there are some other plants to choose from. Sule, go with it. Sule, could you unmute yourself?
That would help.
Thanks.
Sia and I put together a quick list of dry shade root competition type plants. Mahonia repens, blue fescue, Daphne odora, shade tolerant euphorbias, dwarf plumbago, true geraniums, the California native iris douglassiana, the Coria, which is Australian fuchsia, is a lovely one for hummingbirds. My favorite dry shade plant is a California native called hummingbird sage, or Salvia spathacea. There's a great bulb called Clivia miniata, really lovely, and Muscari macrocarpum golden fragrance, and Scilla peruviana. We might have an email for you to get a hold of me, and I have that I can send out.
Yeah, that would be great. And unless you wanted to put it on, we have a couple of, or really 3 handouts for you all that will be on the website with the recorded session. So maybe we can put that list of these plants up there, and that way we can share them with everybody.
Oh, sure.
Great, that would be wonderful. Okay, a couple of more questions I have. You don't like rock or pea gravel for a non-organic mulch? Question mark. Who wants to go for it?
Well, that is something that we see a lot, and it's great in other places. This is something that is done in Europe and Britain a lot, but you think about how hot it gets here in Sacramento, especially if in a south or a west facing landscape. If you get 100-degree temperatures, heat radiating off of streets and driveways, and then you have rock on top of soil, it's very hot, and it will it'll just heat up your soil. It heats up roots of trees and shrubs and plants. You'll have to water more. And so what we're doing is we're trying to create landscapes that will need less water, not more. So anything that increases heat, we're going to find workarounds for that. So we only really use rock and gravel and cobble in specific situations where you might need that little extra drainage of a swale or a berm or something. We don't like to use it for mulch. Does that answer that question?
Yes, I think that answered it. Unless Marcia, you have anything else to add before we move to the next?
Yeah, I have just a little bit to add.
Sure.
It does, that gravel mulches really helps out your soil. That gravel or rocks do not do anything for your soil. So if you want to give your soil a little extra boost and make it better, you're going to use a mulch that breaks down, an organic mulch. Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, mulch will cool the soil and it breaks down to become part of the soil biology and the living part, but gravel is not. So it doesn't add to to the soil health, and it more just cooks everything.
Mhm.
Great answer. And it does need to be replenished as it decomposes, which is an okay thing. So here's another question, and I have an answer from one of the participants. Suggestions for keeping cats from pooping in yards. Keep our cats and the neighborhood cats out. And one of the responses was cayenne pepper works. Just need to reapply it after it rains. And then there was a follow-up question as to whether the cayenne would help to keep the squirrels out, those very annoying squirrels. So any suggestions, comments?
Those guys. I have a little experience with that, but Marcia?
I usually take one case by case solutions for that. Usually if the cats are using a certain area, you have to deter them for a certain amount of time. It's a habits are creatures they use places out of habit. So you just have to deter them, for a while. You got to out habit them.
Okay, all
That's
right.
true. I have used the cayenne pepper finely ground. I will sprinkle it or even put it in a sprayer. Of course, in the rainy season, you'll have to do it more often. I'm not sure if it works on the squirrels. My dog doesn't really like it, and I have gotten it into my own face and my nose and my eyes. So you really have to be careful. True story. So it's really hard to keep applying it. And if somebody else is using the landscape, like turkeys or other animals, you're keeping them out of those spaces. So you really want to think about it. Sometimes putting something sharp and pokey, like old rose clippings, is what I'll do. I'll just crisscross them and lay them out, and it just keeps the cats out for long enough. Of course, I have to clean those up later, but
Great. All right. Well, we have one more question here, two more questions, and then we will close this out. So since I have clay soil, using my grid drip line seems water drips downward and not so much laterally.
Mhm.
My plants aren't receiving moisture unless adding separate drip lines to the individual plants. Other master gardeners have mentioned experiencing the same as well. Any suggestions?
So I can start. So when you first put in that inline grid system, you want to saturate your soil so that that water gets everywhere. And underneath the soil, the dripper just looks like it just it hits at a point on the top, but underneath, if you dig down 4 inches, you'll notice that it goes down in like a pyramid. So one of the ways on a brand new yard to ensure that your new plants are going to get water is to make sure they're planted near one of those emitters, or to add an emitter just special for the new planting. But eventually that grid system is going to take care of all of your plants. It can be a little problem. You have to observe a little bit at the very beginning.
And I would like to add that it's important when you're laying a grid system for the soil surface to be smooth. You don't want it lumpy and bumpy and think, oh, that's okay. Smooth, and then the drip line is laid on it, and then you're using those landscape staples or pins. I do it pretty frequently. I don't put it 2 feet apart. I put them about 18 inches apart at the most, so that those drip lines and the emitters are in contact with the soil. So that would be one thing to add. And I do have 2 other questions, unless Sule, you have something quick to add?
well, a lot of people tell me they have clay soil, and when I actually get out into their garden, they are not having clay soil. And so a lot of times you think that you have heavy clay soils, but you don't have an awareness of what that is. So knowing your soil type is kind of a big deal. And there are some ways to look that up. It's a little more advanced, but getting a little help with soil type is useful, because clay soil, the water can run off. The water hits the soil and runs off to the side. So that cycle and soak comment is a really good way to run water a little bit, then give it some rest so it can sink in a little bit, and then run a little bit more to get your total run time. But on a sandy soil, yes, the water will go straight down. You won't really see it spread if it's a pretty flat space. So
Great, thank you.
big deal.
Okay. And I'd like to suggest that you all consider taking the Green Gardener at Home class. It will be starting on February 9th. It is very reasonably priced. It is being offered by the city of Roseville. And so you could just go to, say, Google City of Roseville gardening workshops, and a whole series of workshops will come up. This is 8 classes that will be 2 hours in length. And so there's a lot of great information about landscape design, soil and soil health, integrated pest management, edible gardening, irrigation. So that's an opportunity to dive in a little bit deeper, and it's coming up fairly quickly. Again, February 9th. Okay. And it's
It's
6:30
funny.
to 8:30 p.m. What's Sule?
It's funny how all of these questions are linked together. So
Yes.
we can't give the best, we can't give you the 100% best answer for you, because the one thing leads to another and your site is specific. But the
Yeah.
Gardener course is excellent. And I think Monica said that it will be up on the RWA website. So
There are 3 questions here that I'm sorry we won't have time for. So perhaps we can answer them and then put them up on the website. Someone said that they have missed this. They may have missed this, but they would like to rip out their backyard lawn, and it's a mixture of crabgrass and other grasses. I've heard mixed things on sheet mulching with cardboard and mulch. Is there any reliable way to deal with crabgrass and lawn removal? And then cycle and soak is another watering option someone mentioned, and that they use plastic plant flats upside down to cover open areas. Cats can't dig and it deters them. They
Mhm.
seem to forget about the space after a few months, and then this person picks them up, and also the cats don't seem to like going to the bathroom there anymore in the wood chips. And then, somebody spreads liquid amber balls, those seed pods heavily where cats do their business. That's a great one. That will deter them long enough to break their habit. So great, great questions and comments. Monica, may we have the next slide, please, while we wrap up here.
I was just going to add one more thing. I see that we have a Master Gardener friend on, and if you have any questions, the Master Gardeners are a great resource. Master Gardener,
Excellent.
we see
Excellent.
our friend Darlene Halstead
Yes.
here.
And there's a lot of great videos at the Sacramento County's Master Gardener website. Again, all of these websites, all these webinars are going to be recorded and available. Next slide, please, Monica. And then, and you can just go through these. When you go on the website, next slide, you can read a little bit more about Sule, Monica, and me. Next slide. And
Marcia.
then we will, pardon me? I said Monica and I meant Marcia. Sule, Marcia, and Cheryl B. So again, special thanks though to the Regional Water Authority. Find out a lot of great information at bewatersmart.info and the Sacramento Suburban Water District. Any last comment before we leave? Thank you all for joining us.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for
Thank
joining
all of you for joining us and being interested in your front yard renovation.
Great. Take care. Is the recording off?